Great, we're going.
Hi, welcome everybody.
Hello.
Good to see you both. So happy to have with us today Richie Hands, Ryan Gann, and Carl Sergio, who are three Young Architect Award winners from AI National that I'm pleased to sit down with today. So thanks for making time on this Friday afternoon.
Happy to be here.
We've
Excited.
got a couple of questions just to talk through. I would love to hear, to start off, if you have an interesting architectural origin story. How did you get to this profession? What drew you to it? Where did that come from? Is it a person, a thing, a moment? Richie, how about you? Got a good story to share?
I don't know if it's a great story, but I definitely was interested in buildings, interested in Lego, love drawing, love painting, really was heavily influenced by the arts. And I think that was sort of the biggest draw. It was finding a way of maintaining that interest while also doing something that is kind of a longer lasting, impactful thing. I will say, as I went through school, I think the psychology of architecture started to become the thing that really kept me in it. But I definitely love sort of the combination of art and science and sort of psychology that really comes with architecture.
Great. How about you,
Yeah,
Ryan?
then
Any Lego logs, Lego, Lincoln logs or Legos in your past, or do you have a different sort of pathway?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely can relate to maybe the cliche story of toys and their influence on exploration and understanding how to put things together. But I would have to say my true influence or maybe aha moment was a connection to MTV Cribs. For those of you that remember, going to celebrities' homes or famous people's homes and kind of seeing their style, seeing the way that they defined home. And I remember distinctly after sort of becoming obsessed and using that as a weekend ritual, drawing what I didn't know were floor plans. And once my mom told me what those were and that that's what architects did, it was sort of a little moment of, this all makes sense. And I definitely want to do something like that.
That's great. How old were you at that point?
Oh, probably like 8, 9.
Okay. Okay. Carly, before we started the call, you talked about it was more about people for you, right? That shaped you.
yeah, yeah, and it's interesting that Richie mentioned psychology because that really resonated with me. I studied psychology in undergrad, have a degree in that, and that was purely because I was interested in how other people thought, and I mean interested in how I thought as well. And I was going to apply to psychology grad school to actually do art therapy because I was interested in something creative, and I had a psych professor who said, you will absolutely be unhappy in that field. It's a lot less creative than you might hope, and it's very rigorous, very much just kind of about following the rules. And then it was my brother, who I think knew me best, who said, geez, I always thought you'd be a good architect. And it was just kind of a light bulb moment for me, because I had just never really given it much thought. It actually came up in one of those kind of prospective career tests that you can take, as a college student through your career center or, guidance counseling, whatever. But at Notre Dame, I was already a year into my undergrad, and the architecture program was a 5-year intensive program, and so I thought, well, I'm already 2 years behind, like I guess that's going to happen in another lifetime, and I didn't give it a second thought. And it wasn't until a few years later that the whole thing came around full circle, and here I am.
I think it speaks to the idea that there's no one pathway in architecture, right? There's no one way to be an architect. There's no one way to think about being involved in this profession, and different people come at it from different perspectives. The thing that sparks one person is different than what sparks it in another person, and it's also not too late, right? I mean, whether you're a middle school student or you're graduating from undergrad, trying to think about what's next, right? There's the whole range in there, which I think is also important. Let's talk a little bit about your award submission that you submitted for the National Young Architect Award, and the focus of your submission, and maybe how that is a reflection of your career path so far and what that looks like. Carl, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, my package was also really about people. My submission was about people. I guess part of my origin story of getting to, professional practicing is that graduating was just a real challenge in the last recession. And I thought it just doesn't have to be this hard. And, once I had kind of figured out how to navigate enough to get myself into the field and into AIA Chicago, I just felt like I should do my best to help other people, to make their way, to make it easier for the next generation. And it wasn't until a number of years later until I, got connected with the Bridge program, for example, and went through that. And that was another light bulb moment of just like, wow, this is so impactful if I can be involved in any way to, to help the program leaders. And then it ended up being, my program to lead. And that's really, I think mentorship has just really kind of become my extracurricular life's work. And partly too, because I think I mean, we all come out of school thinking we're going to be a star architect designer. But at the end of the day, most of what most architects do is pretty boring and uninteresting and not necessarily fulfilling. And I was kind of stuck in that place of like, okay, I'm learning and growing and I'm pursuing my licensure, but I'm not actually, kind of being filled up by this, and I needed something else. And I think, helping other people and connecting with other people was really that way that I found a lot of fulfillment outside of the office. And it's also, kind of come back around. Into the office, and that I was, contributing to the kind of office culture at Gensler, for example, and really doing a lot to, then reinvest myself in people, you know, adjacent to the actual architecture work I was doing.
I think if I kind of looked at in looking at your submission and your work in the profession so far, that keyword of mentorship, right, is really what's driving, a lot of your work and those connections between people. Ryan, if you had to think about sort of that one kind of keyword with your submission, you've done a lot nationally, you've done a lot locally, in the wider profession. How would you kind of characterize your submission and your career path so far in a couple words? Those kind of keywords, I guess.
Yeah, I often tell people that my career is sort of a partnership between design and service, and always trying to see how one informs the other. Service being how I give back, how I lead in my community, how I lead at a national level, and sort of propelling the profession forward. And design, the work that I do, the product of architecture, the process of architecture. And I would say too, when thinking about sort of an award submission, sometimes people think awards are about ego, and it is nice to be celebrated. But this also is like a great forum to reflect at a sort of early point in your career, to look back and see what you've done to create the language, to create the story, and then sort of focus as you move forward. It allows some of the sort of chaos of daily life to fall to the side and become really singularly focused about impact and how I use my limited time and resources to have the impact that I seek.
Right. Richie, reviewing your proposal, your submission, and thinking about your career path, the word pipeline comes to mind for me. Would you agree?
Yes, I think that's the big one. It's funny. It's kind of similar to kind of a combination of both Carl's and Ryan's submissions and sort of what they've done throughout their entire career. I will say I never started anything in my career with like a hopes of winning an award or applying for an award or even thinking about it. It was very much through the lens of here's an opportunity to do something that's interesting. I found it to be really rewarding, and being able to work with sort of the next generation of students, particularly students that look like me, was something that sort of stuck, and having the opportunity to work with the then local president and vice president and Jason Pugh and Oswaldo Ortega directly, both at Gensler but also with INOMA, really sort of gave me opportunities to lead, do stuff in sort of a bit of autonomy, and then also kind of build upon those things. So it was funny, Ryan was talking about reflecting on your career. When I was going through every role that I had throughout INOMA and then AIA, there were some roles that I remembered as I was going through the process, and just like, I think I had like a shower epiphany of like, oh, I had another role that I need to add on to there. And it's one of those things where it sort of progressed from being involved in a specific program, then to being on the board, to leading things now at the national level with NOMA, with Project Pipeline, going from a mentor with ACE to leading an ACE team, to being on the executive board of ACE, and sort of also wanting to sort of back up the people that recommend me for opportunities like being on the AIA board or the INOMA board and NOMA board, and sort of wanting to prove them right and that they are kind of looking out for or they believe in somebody and wanting to prove that I can sort of fulfill that role.
That's great. Before we move to the next set of questions, as we are recording this, people might be wondering, who is David Chase and why is he not have his camera on? I'll just acknowledge David is recording. David is our senior manager of communications, not the fourth silent award winner of this award, but anyway, that's who David is. Anybody's wondering. Let's move on to the next set of questions. Let's think about this moment in time in the profession. I'm going to maybe bundle these questions together a little bit. As you look at this moment in time in the profession, what are some of the strengths that you see in the profession this moment? And what are some of the biggest challenges in the profession right now? Ryan, why don't we start with you?
Ooh, strengths and challenges. I would actually say that I think my strength and challenge might be the same. So I started to practice at what I like to call the edges of architecture, sort of maybe in the margins and beyond capital A architecture, more than just creating buildings and spaces. You know, we build communities. Our biggest strength and what we go to school for is to learn design thinking. It's about problem solving, pulling together all these complex inputs, whether they're codes and regulations, whether they're opinions from the client, whether they're consultant teams. Like, there's this huge complex process that goes into creating buildings, and we're collaborating there. We're pulling all of these millions of pieces of information together. And I think the ability to be able to look through those millions of inputs and either create a building, create a system, create a solution is like a huge asset to solve some of society's most complex problems, both in the past, but also looking forward into the present. I see that as a huge value. So from a strength perspective, that's a huge strength of architecture. But I also think that's one of our weaknesses, is that we still as a profession have guarded or thought about the definition of what we do, how we architect, as something that's very narrow, when in reality, our clients and society are looking for something much broader.
That's great. Richie, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with everything Ryan was saying. I think too, we've gotten into a ability to produce more complex buildings with smaller teams at a quicker pace, and I think that is an actual skill set and a strength of the profession, that we can deliver something that is way more complex than we could have done in previous years, just because the tools that we have at our disposal. I think too, even though sometimes it feels slow, we have been good at sort of adapting to change and trying to find ways of highlighting or amplifying and starting to get better focused on some of these things that are, I think, could be perceived as a threat to the profession. Diversity is a big one. There's been a much better collaboration across the organizations between AIA, NOMA, NCARB, and all. There's more collaboration to make sure that the profession continues to grow and stays healthy and it stays alive. And one of the big things that came up I'm at the conference right now, the NOMA conference in Baltimore, and one of the things that was highlighted is in 2018 there were just over 800 NOMA members, and this year we're nearly 4,000. So that kind of growth in under a decade is amazing, and also sort of the big challenges towards the profession of increasing the number of Black and brown architects from just under 1 or 2% of the profession Now we're just over it, but sort of getting towards doubling the number of Black architects in the next 5-6 years is actually achievable, which is an incredible feat when we're able to do that. I would say too, some of the challenges, I think there, ironically, there was a seminar that I was in this morning, and I think there's still some carryover from sort of some bad habits that the profession has had for a long time. A lot of it starts sort of within academia, where it's the implied that you hear all day and all night, and sort of architecture is what you do and nothing else. And I think it sort of breeds sort of this bad habit of you're there all the time. If you're not doing architecture, you're not doing something right. If you don't have any, if the only thing you like is architecture, that's the perfect architect, as opposed to like having a healthier balance. I think firms are getting better about this and trying to help prevent burnout and actually addressing the fact that burnout is prevalent in the profession. But I still think it is something that there's sort of those pieces that have just sort of historically been a part of the profession that haven't been fully weeded out yet.
I have really admired the last, I'll say that the most recent generation of new graduates that are speaking up about these issues in a more vocal way that certainly was not the case when I graduated. And I don't know, how long have the three of you been out of school now?
2010
Undergrad, I guess
for
it's
me.
been,
Mhm.
yeah, I graduated undergrad in 2011.
Okay.
Give or take.
So in that
Yeah,
sort
it's
of,
been out for a decade.
yeah, so that sort of 10-year mark or so, yeah.
Mhm.
Carl, you see oh, this issue playing out in the Bridge Mentorship Program here at AIA Chicago, where you are as one of the organizers of Bridge. You're seeing that sort of Bridge mentee that's 5-ish years out of school, and then you're seeing also the fellows who are 20 to 30 years out typically, right, in the profession. When you look at the profession at this time, what do you think of the strikes and what are the biggest challenges? And obviously it looks different depending on where you are in that continuum of the profession, but from where you sit, how do you see those strengths and challenges?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think I'm cautiously optimistic, and I would give a kind of meta, like big picture answer, just that I think we're at a large and long moment in time, but a moment nonetheless, in society and politics in so many ways. Obviously, we have the election around the corner, but I just think that so many things about the way we live and work are changing, have been changing. The issue of DE&I is very much ongoing still. NOMA's growth has been fantastic. So I'm hopeful that a lot of things that are changing, whether or not they're necessarily good, will lead to good things in the near future, and in the long term. I think specifically for architecture, it's interesting to be working in workplace, as the way we work is still changing. I mean, Dell and Amazon just announced 5-day, back in the office work weeks, which has been very controversial. And we're designing spaces for office buildings to try and get people to come back to the office, but also to try and support hybrid work. So that's been kind of fun to work around, and in that space. But to answer your question a little bit more about Bridge 2, I think it is interesting at least to see the different issues, but also the commonalities that come up between the young professionals and the fellows, and the ways that they might have different perspectives, but then also shared ones. I think is really great to kind of be in the middle of those conversations. And my role there is to kind of bring those generations together over shared conversations and topics and kind of work together as best we can on some of these issues. Specifically on the diversity of the program, the diversity of the College of Fellows. We're constantly getting requests for more fellows that are women, more fellows that are people of color, and there's nothing we can actually do about that until there are more of them as fellows. And so our role is actually really to support young professionals as much as possible, including applying for the Young Architect Award, to kind of get in that pipeline to become fellows, to become leaders, to become role models for future generations. And that's really, I think, been my focus, is the long answer.
Wonderful. I'm going to package these next two questions together uh, with my earlier question about you're roughly 10 years-ish out from graduation. When you look back, how does your work, how does the profession, how does your sort of day-to-day, how does it look different when you graduated versus today? How do you see it different? How do you see your work differently?
I could hop in. I think I spoke a little bit earlier about this sort of balance between design and leadership, so maybe I'll lean into the leadership side of things. I think as a student, I was blissfully ignorant in some ways about the doors that I was opening and my ability to sort of create connections and nurture relationships between my colleagues, but also with professionals. And upon graduation, sort of just took that as, oh, that's what you just continue doing. You do that now in a professional world, whether that's with AIA Chicago, AIA Illinois, or AI nationally. And I was sort of in those early years, maybe a little shocked to find that I was often the youngest person in the room by a significant age difference, that our leaders, while they were well intentioned about sort of nurturing and propelling the profession forward, didn't have this sort of pulse of what the next generation was seeking. So after sort of having some recognition of feeling like the odd person out in some instances, being like, wait a minute, why do we have to do it the same way? Can't we rethink these models? Can't we rethink who's invited into these conversations? And I started to sort of take on this philosophy of bringing my own chair with me into the room and bringing others and opening the door and leaving the door open for others to follow. And that's sort of now matured into my current leadership philosophy, which is if I can shatter the glass ceiling or open a door for someone else, that's the work, that's the challenge that I have. But then the challenge that comes behind is the implementation, it's the visioning, it's the creating the culture, creating the sense of belonging in a profession that for too long has shut people out, and leveraging just being part of the dialogue, being part of the decision making majority instead of the minority. And that's really given me sort of a new take on how I sort of shift my time, shift my resources, and shift my passion into the future.
Richie, how about you? How does the profession or how does your work feel different versus 10 years ago when you started?
I mean, I think it's from just like a pure work perspective, I definitely know more than I did when first coming out of school. There were a lot of things that I just didn't know to ask because I'd never been exposed to it. I would
Now you
say
know
similar
what you don't know.
exactly. I would say similar to Ryan, I'd say I've always been fairly bullish with sort of making sure sort of the quietest voice or sort of the lowest on the proverbial like org chart had sort of a voice. So when I was an intern at the G, I also ended up running the intern program as well, but also made sure that they had connections to all the principals, who to reach out to if they had any questions, how to go through things, how to make sure their voice was heard, how to make sure that the intern program itself sort of gave them a platform to sort of their platform and a bit of autonomy to sort of talk about who they are, what they're learning. And then sort of as I've carried over onto Lamar Johnson Collaborative, it's definitely kind of expanded into how can I advocate for or continue to advocate for other people in a way that this person is amazing. They have expressed interest in working on this project type, or they just finished all their exams, but they need 160 CA hours. How can we get them to get through this sort of as quickly as possible? Or even just trying to flag things that come up as just based off of what I'm hearing. I feel like I've been able to maintain a fairly comfortable I don't know if that's the right word, but I've been able to sort of like have a platform to be blunt, be honest, be transparent, and also sort of kind of continue to bring up things that come up, good or bad, and then try to find ways of highlighting them or continuing to build upon things that are good. If we got, for example, we recently within the last couple of years got parental leave. Amazing, something too that can be improved upon, and something that has sort of continued to be a thing that's come up time and time again of just like, we have this now, what's the next process to expand upon it, and here are some areas that we've highlighted, here's what we've been doing, how can we continue to improve these, or find opportunities to switch the way that we're approaching it, if at all possible.
I'm almost hearing from the two of you is that in these last 10 years, your voice has gotten louder, but also your voice has gotten quieter to be able to listen and bring others along and know when it's time to listen and when it's time to speak up. And that's an interesting kind of dynamic of being both louder and quieter at the same time. Carl, how about you? How does your work look and feel different in these years since graduation?
Well, what you just mentioned really resonates with me too, because yeah, I do feel like there was, a period of time that I was working on sort of building myself up, so to speak. And once I got to a point that I felt like I had figured out how to do that, then I realized that I had that experience that I could share with others, that I could focus on, helping build others up now. And I think that, that's the biggest, I don't know, interesting thing looking back is just remembering how, how dumb I felt graduating from school and starting my first job. Like, wow, I actually know next to nothing, practically speaking, for being a working architect. And it was humbling and scary. And, there's just years of imposter syndrome there, that I think, I'm still struggling with at times. But once I think found enough confidence, um, to admit that I didn't know everything and that that was okay, and to know what I didn't know. I think, it's like the biggest piece of advice I can give to other people is to get to that point as soon as you can. Like, getting your license helps a lot, I think, in getting a kind of minimum competency as an architect, whether or not, you need the letters behind your name. But it gives you a sense that, like, I know something and I know what I don't know. And you can be confident in asking questions and in moving forward and admitting things that you don't know. So I think that's the biggest thing now is, having the confidence with who I am and where I'm at professionally, and that just feels great. But I also want to say that I think that my involvement in AIA, which started a lot later than Ryan's, for example, of which I'm very jealous, um, it felt like a life hack to to leadership and to personal and professional development and growth, in that you could really do almost anything you wanted if you're just willing to raise your hand, if you're just willing to volunteer, to put in a little time, to kind of roll up your sleeves and get to know a few people. And so that's another thing that I advise people all the time is, and it doesn't have to be AI, it can be NOMA, it can be, Project Pipeline, it could be Habitat for Humanity, whatever. Just such a amazing opportunity to do something in parallel to your career, especially, if you're years away from a real leadership role in your career, where you can have a leadership role immediately in a volunteer capacity. And it just helps you grow, and learn and find confidence so quickly. You're muted.
I see that so often in the committees that we have here, which is that um, uh, watching somebody that is a young professional, emerging professional that might not have that leadership role in the office, but watching them really just grow into something here of moving an idea to execution, bringing others along, building consensus, staking out where we're headed, how do we get there within their committee, and you all are examples of that in ways that you've gotten involved in in AIA, in NOMA, in other allied organizations. It's really, really, really clear. Let's sort of just finish up with that. Carl gave some advice for new grads. Short-term ideas here, or some kind of quick wrap up. Richie, what new advice for new grads? Where would you end there?
I would say maybe channel your inner toddler and ask why. Be curious, ask questions, not in like an accusatorial way or like in an undermining way, but from that place of curiosity. That's what gets me up in the morning, is that sort of, there's a world out there that I don't know, and I'll never be able to know all corners of it, but that persistent pursuit of new information, it's from a place of empathy, it's from an interest in learning. And to my earlier comment too about there's so many ways to practice architecture. And if you aren't inquisitive, if you aren't asking those questions, you're not going to be able to sort of define the way in which you want to practice architecture. That could take you 10 years, it could take you 60 years, and like that's okay. And that should be an exciting part of this profession. There are ways to practice that we haven't even defined yet. And finding those threads and defining that for yourself, that's your journey. No one can tell you how to do that. And I think that I wish I had been told that earlier in life. I think I just sort of, as an individual, inherently understood that or was empowered. But yeah, seek that out. Curiosity.
Richie, last to you. New advice for new grads.
Yeah, I mean, I think very much what Ryan and Carl both said. I think too, don't be complacent sort of where you are, and also don't sort of try to look for the perfect place right off the bat. Take opportunities as they come, and you'll kind of build upon your skill set. And if you're looking for opportunities and those opportunities don't happen in the place you're currently at, don't be afraid to look elsewhere. I think it's one of those things you shouldn't sort of short circuit your own professional development just because of something that may be dangled out in front of you that really doesn't exist. But I mean, very much continue to ask questions, and also if there's something you're passionate about, just continue doing it. I think that's sort of what's been a consistent thread between all of us, is we found something that we've found some value in, or have been passionate about, and that's sort of the continuation, and it's just the thing that is done for fun as opposed to sort of a second job or or something that feels tedious.
Great. On this note, we just a preview for those of watching. Whenever you get to watch this, we're going to look at maybe in the spring of 2025, doing some sort of session with the three of you on how you applied, tips for applying, things to think about in putting together your submission. So people can watch for that. And thanks to the three of you for your willingness to share what you learned going through this process as well, which is no small feat, right? It takes time. It takes some after hours work to pull it all together. But maybe you can share some things with others that are thinking about this path behind you. So I just want to thank you so much for the time today, but also just in a wider sense, thank you for your leadership in our local AIA Chicago chapter, in your leadership in the state and national organizations, our allied organizations to AIA. It's such a delight to work with the three of you and watch you lead in so many different ways, and you're such an inspiration to so many. So congratulations on the Young Architect Award for 2024, and yeah, have a good rest of your day.
All right, thank you, Jen.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Great.
Jen.